So today's podcast might be a little long and rambly, but I promise I'm making a point and it all comes together. Before we really get started, I wanted to go over an anagram. An anagram is a word that is made up of the same letters as another word, like Irma Vep is, I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen the play, but Irma Vep comes together as vampire, right? So if you take all of the initials for woman formerly known as my stepmother, woman formerly known as my stepmother. Oh, okay, I made an error. Woman formerly known as my stepmother, if I take all the letters, and I put them together in something that sort of looks like something, it becomes WKF, which I really like, WKF Sam with 2 M's. So I'm going to refer to this person as WKF Sam throughout this podcast because she's the woman formerly known as my stepmother, and I don't want to use her name, and I don't really want to get into too many details about that. So here's the story. My dad got super sick in August of 2019. Actually, I think I just realized how sick he was. I think he was probably really sick before then. I mean, he was coughing up blood. So I would say he was really sick before then. I just figured it out and got extra involved at that point. And it turns out that he had an ejection fracture of 30% and he had a lung capacity of 30%. Now, this is my memory of it. His numbers might have been slightly different. Maybe his ejection fracture was a little bit different than that, and his lung capacity was a little different than that. But the way I remember it, he had an ejection fracture of 30%, and he had a lung capacity of 30%. So for the normal individual who doesn't know what that means, it means that when you take a big swallow of air into your lungs, hold on, I just realized my computer's not plugged in. There we go. When you take a big swallow of air into your lungs and you let that air out, that should be 100% capacity if you are a fully adult human functioning without asthma or some other lung disease or some other lung issue like fluid in your lungs or fluid outside your lungs that's pressing on your lungs that stops them from taking in their full breath. So my dad had lung disease, which stopped him from being able to take a full breath. So what used to be 100% for him was now down to 30%. He also had an ejection fracture of 30%. So that means that whatever his heart used to pump out at 100%, he was now functioning at 30%, meaning he was losing 70% of his pump. Whatever his pump was doing, it wasn't giving a full, it was only giving 30% of the, right? So he was only getting out of his heart instead of a out of his heart. So he's only getting 30% out of what could have been 100% whenever his heart beat, which is really bad for circulation. And it's really bad for stamina and really bad for brain power. So if your heart isn't pumping all that it can out and your lungs aren't oxygenating your blood as much as it needs to, you're only getting 30% of your blood oxygen and you're only getting 30% of the heartbeat. Dude, you're not doing so well. And after there was a moment we were in the hospital when my dad was still alive, but not conscious, not really conscious, and not really present. And I was there, and there were other family members there. And WKF Sam was there, and WKF Sam said, I should probably back up and tell you some other story. So my dad was super sick. He was in the hospital for weeks, and then he discharged to a rehab facility to get stronger so that he could do, but you can only rehab so much when you work at your heartbeat only pumps at 30% and your lungs only oxygenate at 30%. There's only so much physical therapy you can do before you're just plumb exhausted and can't do anything. So they eventually his insurance company was like, yeah, we're cutting you off because you can't actually do anything because you can't breathe and your heart isn't pumping blood. So I informed my family member who had some, you know, had some stake in the game with my dad and was like, you may want to go visit him before he goes back to WKF Sam's house, because I'm not really sure WKF Sam will let you in the house. I'm not even sure WKF Sam is going to let me in the house. And I mean, WKF Sam did tell me that, like, I wasn't allowed to come to the house like I had been going to the rehab or the hospital to visit my father. Whatever, you're the one who has to figure out his food and how to dress him and how to take care of him, because he can't walk 150 feet and he has 0 stamina. So that's on you. If you don't let me in and help, I can't come in and help. And so I said to my family member, you may want to, you know, go visit him before he goes home, because I don't think he's going to have a lot longer. I think we're close. And yeah, he went home. He was home for about 4 days, and he had a really good heartbeat that just took, he had an ablation, which was a surgery inside the heart. And because his heart wasn't pumping very well, it was pumping only at 30% of what it normally does. It grew some scar tissue, some, as they like to say, vegetation, which is like, you know, probably some clots and a whole bunch of other stuff. And those clots flew out of his heart he had one really good heartbeat. It broke out of the 30% and broke into, I don't know, some higher level. And it shot all of that sludge that was at the bottom of his heart, wherever the ablation was, and just shot it straight up into his brain. So that happened on Monday. He went home on a Thursday from the rehab, and on Monday night, his body basically said, we're done. We're done. And then he officially died on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which was 2 days later. So Monday he stroked out. Tuesday he was in the hospital. Wednesday he left. As I like to say, he took the big leave. Sometime between when he went home on Thursday and when he stroked out on Monday, WKF Sam admitted when we were in the hospital that she took him to the Apple store to fix something on his computer that wasn't working properly, which may have been working properly, but you're only getting 30% of your oxygen and you're only getting 30% of your blood to your brain. It's possible, like, none of it was working. Like, I don't know, maybe his computer was working fine, but it was his brain who was a problem. I'm not really sure. But she took him to the Apple store, and she said she parked right out front and that he walked in, but he didn't walk in the correct store because the Apple store was closer to the street, and there was a jewelry store that used to be closer to, like, the other stores. And apparently he went into the jewelry store thinking it was the Apple store, and because they flipped the two stores. And WKF Sam was mentioning in the hospital that she was really upset by this, that she was really upset that he went into the wrong store. And I was like, well, that actually makes sense, because, like, he's got limited capacity at this point, given his, like, brain function and his oxygen concerns. So then, so she took him to the store, and she actually didn't make him dinner that night. She told him it was in the refrigerator and that he could get it for himself. And then when I was there on Sunday, she actually asked him if he wanted food, and he said, oh, really excited, oh, I'd love a soda. And I was standing right there, and she came over and she slammed the soda down on the table in front of him because she was so angry that she had to get it for him. She just went bam with it on the table. And Dad and I looked at each other. This is part of the story that, like, I told him when she was out of the room, if he wanted to come live with me, I would make sure he got everything he needed. I would make sure he got food. I would make sure he got everything he needed. Like, I will take care of you. And Dad said to me for the second time, these are my decisions. I've made these decisions. But actually, I don't think, no, he said that to me the first time I told him that if he wanted to come live with me, we would figure it out. We would make sure he got the care he needed. He said, these are my decisions. I'll live with my decisions. The second time, when she slammed the soda on the table and went upstairs, I said, move in with me and we'll figure it out. He didn't say anything. He was totally silent. And I think on Monday, I think between Friday and Monday, he made a decision. And after she after he left, I then, after he died, I got to thinking about WKF Sam and her lack of understanding about his body and how his body was working and what it means to have an ejection fracture of 30 and what it means to have a lung capacity of 30% and what it means to have congestive heart failure and what it means to have lung disease. And at one point I saw a chest x-ray and I just burst into tears. And I was like, Dad, now I understand like why you can't breathe. And then, you know, she just stared at me and I knew in that moment that she did not believe I knew how to read a chest x-ray. So fast forward after Dad left and I, you know, pulled up the pieces of my life together as best I could without my father, which, you know, was surprisingly challenging and surprisingly relatively easy. I got to thinking, and one of the thoughts I had is I wanted to reach out to my dad's pulmonologist and I wanted to ask him if it was possible to invent a device that would recreate an EF, an ejection fracture, or lung disease. So there could be two different dials on it, two different settings. So if you don't have lung disease and you just have congestive heart failure, then your setting would just be on the congestive heart failure side, and whatever your EF is, then we could like move the dial to like Dad was at 30, or maybe you've got 50, you've got an ejection fracture of 50%. And then we can put it on family members and help them understand what it's like to be you and ask them to go, put this thing on your face. Yeah, it's really embarrassing. We get that. Put this thing on your face and now go grocery shopping. Or maybe just walk across your kitchen floor, because if 150 feet did my dad in, just go out and get the mail, right? Just take the garbage out while you're wearing this. You can do a lung capacity setting. So if your lung capacity is like 50% and you've got an ejection fracture of 20%, then family members can put this device on and find out what it feels like to be you. And they can literally walk a mile in your shoes. That's my idea. Well, this is why this came up. I mean, this has been in my head since 2019, maybe 2020, when we had a lot of time to think because we were all in our houses. The other day, I bought a corset. And I love it. It's great, except it's too small. Too small and takes... So mass exists and, you know, the displacement, right? So when you take something and you squeeze it, things go up and down. So I definitely have a big, giant roll of extra back skin flab that comes out from underneath the corset and flops over, and then I definitely push everything that's in my belly, like anything that's getting squeezed, it pushes my belly down even more. Like it definitely takes everything and squeezes it in, but it just makes it go up and down either side of the corset. And it was a small. I put on a large, and the large was so big I actually got the two flaps in the back to touch each other up by my boobs, because it was so big in the boobs that I didn't have enough to fill it. But when I put on the small was so small, I had to squeeze it a whole lot so that the two back flaps were close enough that the satin underlay underneath the laces didn't show any skin. I had to pull it like you would not believe how tight. And I actually started to lose finger feeling in my fingers, and I got super, super faint. And I actually at one point thought I might pass out. Now, I have had a complete, what's the word I want? Educational view, cerebral view, understanding of why women in the 1800s, 17, 16, 1500s used to faint all the time. I had a completely I understood completely in a academic perspective about why women fainted, and they were seen as the fairer sex. If you take somebody's body and you squeeze it enough that you actually change their skeleton. The Mutter used to have a skeleton the Mutter used to exist. Mutter was a museum of medical oddities in Philadelphia. and they had a skeleton of a regular human, a skeleton of a person with giantism, Morphan's disease, and they also had a skeleton of a person with dwarfism. And they were all next to each other so that you could see how the bone structures were so different in the 3 different skeletons. They had a skeleton about how corsets change the body structure completely in a female, and some females removed ribs so that they could be even thinner. And after a while, women had to put a wooden pestle up into their vagina to keep their uteruses from falling out, because that's what would happen. Like, they would press down so much with the corset that they would like start to expel their own organs. And then you also can't get a deep breath. And so fainting was a thing. And when I put this corset on, I was amazed at how much I lacked capacity to handle pretty much anything. I sat down in it actually, and I like squeezed everything, because when you sit down, it crunches. Like, I talked about this once in a podcast about babies in the car seat, about how their little bodies get all crunched up in there and their lungs need to be able to be strong enough to handle a car seat. Well, yeah, your lungs are not given full capacity in a corset, and everything is swished. And even the day after I took the corset off, there were moments where I was like a little woozy, and I was like, I need to get my internal organs back into space again. Like, they're not in the right shape in the inside. I need everything to shift back. And then I was thinking about what wearing one every day would do to a body. And then that led me thinking about, what is my ejection fracture while I'm wearing this thing? And what is my lung capacity while I'm wearing this thing? And is it possible to give somebody a test to find their lung capacity and a test to find their ejection fracture while they're wearing a corset, especially if the corset's too small? And I thought about these things, and I thought about the device that we used to make I want to make for people with ejection fractures that are lower than 100% and lung capacity that's lower, but 2 different dials, so that, you know, you get 2 different systems, so that if it's just your lung capacity that's low or your ejection fracture is low, you don't have to have the other one involved. And then I got to thinking about, like, as a study, like when you're in English class and you're reading, I don't know, some book like Gone with the Wind, or you're watching a movie like The Pirates of the Caribbean, where she faints and falls off the cliff because she's in a corset, right? I would really like to study women and their capacities, both ejection fracture and lung capacity, while in a corset, and then be able to maybe use that same device when people are studying English to like help people understand what it actually feels like to wear a corset, and help people understand that women are not necessarily weaker. If anything, they might even be stronger, because there's no man that I know that would put up with that. Literally, there's no guy that I know that would want to put on a device that would stop them from being able to breathe or handle any kind of hardship in life, because you don't have the actual physical capacity to regulate your breathing. Now, as a meditator, when I was in the too tight corset, like, I definitely felt a massive difference, and I was pushing my air as far down in my lungs as possible, because chest breathing wasn't really possible, because it was squeezed too much, and like deep breathing wasn't really possible. It was really hard. And so I'm just curious about ejection fractures, and I'm curious about lung capacity while you're in a corset. And I'm also really curious as if that can be recreated and help people who are reading such literature about the time period, or even historians, so that they can understand exactly what. And let's be honest, if you're not getting your full capacity of oxygen to the brain, like, that's definitely going to make you make poor decisions. So I don't blame women for fainting, and I don't blame them for, you know, not being able to make, you know, being, quote, irrational. Dude, take the corset off and let's see after 2 weeks of getting your organs back into the space where they're supposed to be, if you do a little better. I think that's where I am. So a large is too big and a small is too small. If anybody wants a small corset, let me know. And I'm waiting for the medium to arrive. And so hopefully we'll be able to figure this out. And it's really, I like it. It's a fun little top. I appreciate it for its aesthetic qualities. I just don't appreciate it for how much it squeezes me tiny. Very tiny. And yeah, I think those are all the thoughts.